What's up, everyone? Anderson Emerole here, and I'm at the 2024 World Athletic Relays in Nassau, Bahamas. And this is a very, very special meet, as it's not only a World Relays, but even more importantly, this meet is being used as a qualifier for the Olympic Games, where countries will be able to get their spot in the 4x1, 4x4, and the mixed relay in Paris later on this summer. Now, the United States has always been on top for the most part when talking about the relays, but we of course know there's been ups and downs specifically on the 4x1s. So while I was here, I thought it'd be a perfect opportunity to go behind the scenes and get some insight into how the USA relays work, both on the men's and the women's side. I got a chance to speak with Mechelle Freeman, head coach for the USA Women's Relays, as well as Mike Marsh, head coach for the US Men's Relays. And they gave me a lot of insight into how they make decisions about what they're doing in practice, how athletes actually get selected for the relays, which athletes will be running which legs, and ultimately how things come together to get to the Olympic Games as well as the World Championships. They also both spoke about the potential for the USA, women as well as men, to break the world record. So let's first dive in with Mechelle Freeman, head coach of the US Women's Relays.
All right, so we're here in the Bahamas with Coach Mechelle Freeman, head coach of the women's relays for USA.
Yes.
So talk about how practice was both yesterday and then also today here on the track.
Yeah, practice was really good. You know, we are working with a group of women that has been together over the last 3 championship years. So we have a cohesiveness. We know what our goals are. We've been working on maximizing baton speed, so they know the components that go into that. So we're excited just to have another opportunity to work on everything that we do to bring gold medals home.
And so when did you become head coach for the USA Relays for Women?
I've been the assistant relays coach for USA Track and Field since 2015. I became the head women's relays coach in 2022. So Oregon 2022 was my first year leading the women's as the head relays coach.
And so a little backstory, you went to South Carolina, am I correct, right?
Yes.
And then you eventually competed for USA, won a couple medals
Yes.
internationally. Like, what was that kind of journey like from college to competing for USA?
Oh man, well, South Carolina sets the tone for championships. And we were the first national championship in any sport to the university, so I've always had an expectation of winning, and we just had a great program. We had a great program of sisterhood. We had a great team. We were a relay program. Coach Fry always made sure we had 5 relays at every track meet. So just being in a training environment where we had pros from Alan Johnson to Melissa Morrison-Howard, Terrence Trammell. We had so many Olympic athletes in our group. It was just a normal thing for us to be around that level of talent and excellence. So just going into my professional career, I just thought it was a normal thing for me to think that I would make a world championship team or an Olympic team. So I just carried that expectation of being in a great environment like South Carolina.
So I'm curious about process has been processing. I mean, like you said, there's been a ton of turnover. How do you how is the team selected, right? Like, what insight do you have into how athletes who may make the team or some who might not make the team, how do they actually eventually get onto the 4x1 for USA?
Well, first you start with selection onto the global championship team. You know, World Athletics puts those selection procedures together. So, for instance, in the 4x100 Olympic year, we take the top 3 in the 100 meters that are automatically selected in the relay pool. Then we have 2 discretionary choices as the head relay coaches to work with the committee and just present who we think best fits in to put out a team that can get the job done. So when I look at the discretionary selections, you look at who you have, and then you look at the areas of opportunities and to fill in those spaces to make sure you go in, because we're in a leg-based program. What I mean by that is that people are maybe good at first leg, people may be good at second leg or third leg. So if you have top 3 that have a history of doing really well on certain legs, then you want to make sure that those discretionary selections are filling in those spaces that can make sure you have a full cohesive team.
And so can an athlete not make Team USA but individually and then actually get onto the relay?
For sure. So if you don't make top 3, for instance, Olympic year this year, anyone who competes at the Olympic trials can be selected for the relay pool as a discretionary selection.
Gotcha. So let's say you have an athlete who competes at Texas relays, where everyone is there and they get that practice in. Maybe they compete at another spring meet as well, but they don't get the chance to compete at Olympic trials for whatever reason. But you've seen some really, really good things from them in practice and at these meets. Could they have the chance to compete at Worlds or Olympics?
When it comes to selection of the relays, you have your automatic selections, but your discretionary selections, you have to pick someone who competes at the Olympic trials. However, it is a rule that under extenuating circumstances, if someone was not able to compete, that you will have to present that to a committee and it will be approved on a case-by-case basis. So depending on what that looks like, what that reason is, do you want to advocate for an athlete that you think can help you get the job done? You have that process set up to be able to do that.
And then how much insight or how much communication is there between like coaches and agents and like people into that kind of selection process?
That's one thing that Coach Marsh and I have been really working on, is just making sure the communication process is clear, just making sure they understand our principles, what our intentions are, making sure the athletes know what we're looking for, so they know what goes into our discretionary considerations. So we create athlete profiles and give them the different metrics that we're tracking. It's very key to understand that with the relays, you have speed, but you also have skill. And so it's in our process, we want to make sure that they're hitting those metrics such as acceleration or the way they read marks and the passing of the baton. All those skill-based things have value too. And so you have to make sure that they understand the value in those intrinsic and skill things, as well as the speed side.
And so how do you make the decision to put a specific athlete on a specific leg, right? So we might have an idea of one athlete is better on the straight, but what you're saying in practice might indicate actually they're better on a different leg. Like, how do you make those decisions?
It's really important when it comes to selection of putting athletes in the best places as possible where their strengths are. So if you have turn runners, straightaway runners, people who may handle the baton better with both hands, those things are important, and you just want to make sure that everyone's in the best position to maximize performance. So when you're looking at selection, top 3, for instance, in the 100 are automatically selected to go in your relay pool. So if I get 2 discretionary selections, then I want to make sure that I'm filling any opportunities on leg-based performance. If I need a third leg, then I'm going to look for somebody that I know can deliver that type of performance. So it's just very important to select athletes that can meet the demands of each leg.
I'm curious how, like, if an athlete says, I want to run this leg, I really feel comfortable on this leg, but you're seeing something different in practice, how do you kind of balance that?
It's always good to get athlete feedback. Again, you want athletes feeling confident when they step on the track that they can execute the demands of where they're placed. So it's two-way communication. An athlete tells me, I feel good at this leg, but the good thing about it, their performance can speak for itself. So I'm an objective person when it comes to that. If they feel great about a certain leg, if they're executing it great, then it should correlate.
There you go. And then we spoke a little bit about like the spring season meets where you have like a Texas relays, or athletes go to Florida relays, sometimes Penn. Of course, we're here at World Relays. Why are those meets important to help you determine who's going to be on the team, who's going to be running what leg later on down in the summer?
Our spring domestic relay program is really important for us to have those touch points with the athletes early in the season. The USA program, of course, we have depth in the sprints, so the turnover rate in our relays is higher than other countries. So we want to make sure that we can increase that amount of time to teach our process, make sure they have touch points at each of the legs, and then by the time is for selection in the summer, we have a great idea of how they're performing individual races, but also on relay legs.
And we spoke a little bit about selection process, and like you've competed on USA relays in the past. I'm curious how the selection process was back in like the 2000s relative to how it is now.
Yeah, I would say the difference as an athlete from a coach in the relays is just making the selection a little bit objective for myself. Using the baton speed, it gives me a way to measure how our athletes are performing. And so with that tangible way to decide where to place athletes, who to place. It's been very helpful in helping with clarity, communication, and expectation of everybody involved, so we can all be on the same page from the beginning to the end.
There you go. And we know the USA has been so successful, like I was saying, since 2011. The women have won a medal at every global championships. So can you talk about that process of getting the women ready to be as successful as they've been?
It's just really important working with the women to get everybody on the same page, and we're working on one accord. So I come in making sure they understand what our process is, and that's making sure we have maximum speed through the zone, maximizing our baton speed. That's the area that we can take advantage of and close gaps. When you have everybody around in the world that are just as fast as you gotta take as much advantage as possible. So they look ready. They come ready mentally and physically. They know the expectation of being champions, and that's what they deliver. So we're gonna keep that going.
There you go. And now as we look forward towards the Olympics, like I was saying yesterday, you have Olympic gold on your minds, you have world record on your minds. What's like the conversations with the women as you're practicing, as we're leading up towards everything?
Oh, they know it's a great year to break the world record. That's what we talk about. I mean, we are ready for it, something that we've been building on. We're ready. The world record, of course, the gold medal. Our job is to always go get it done. Champion mindset is important to us, but it's time. It's time for the world record to go.
And just a little bit in terms of differences of 4x1 and 4x4,
Yeah.
where obviously on the fan side, on our side, we may look at the 4x4 and say, they don't need much practice. They
Oh,
just
my
have
goodness.
to, kind
Yeah.
of run, hand off the baton, they look back. But what is it from the coach's side in terms of practice there?
Yeah, the 4x4 is always interesting because the baton exchange is only just little than 4% of the time that you spend on the track. Yet, our errors are there. And so we just have to come together and understanding that with the USA, again, they're not used to running with one another. So we have to take that time that we have together very seriously and understand the importance of connection, being disciplined with the details. It's not the collegiate system where you're able to practice with each other all the time. So you just have to be very critical and disciplined about those technical details when it comes to the USA Relay 4x4. So we've been really spending time on that. We want to take advantage of the time that we have together, go over the critical details, and make sure they understand the importance of the discipline.
So speaking of the 4x4, where the Tokyo Olympics, we saw, Allison Felix, Sydney, a thing, and Dalila run in the 4x4 final. And there was some conversation because it's like, hold on, you're bringing in all these quote unquote non 400 meter runners. How does a decision like that get made? Because similarly in this year, we're going to have, the schedule doesn't favor like the 400 women in the 4x4. I'm curious how...
We're in that same schedule conflict. Yeah, going into the Olympic Games, the 400 meter final for women is on the day of the 4x400 prelims for the women. So if an athlete is in the 400 final, we won't have them for the prelims, right? So that means you're looking at on-site performance. On-site performance is going to be critical when it comes to maximizing performance in the 4x4s. You're looking at times at that point, who's ready to perform, who's ready for the big moments. And in Tokyo, you had 4 big performers, medalists, record makers, and you want to make sure you maximize that and put them together to go out there and give the world what they want to see. And that was a special moment. So going into the Olympic Games, same thing. We want to make sure, looking at the schedule, looking at on-site fitness, even if you're a hurdler, it may work out that just metrics throughout the whole year, you're keeping track of all those things. But in that moment, you'll know that you are committed to putting the best 4 out there, even if the 400 isn't their main event.
Thanks so much, Mechelle.
So that was my conversation with Mechelle Lewis Freeman, head coach for the U.S. Women's Relay. Now let's move over to the men's side and discuss with Mike Marsh, head coach for the U.S. Men's Relay. And he's going to talk about, again, the selection process, how he makes decisions about practice, which athletes are going to be running which legs, and also the potential for the U.S. men to break the world record. Let's dive in.
All right, so we're here with Mike Marsh, head relay coach for the USA men. Talk to me just about how practice has been here at the Bahamas in the World Relays.
Practice has gone well. Yeah, we try to get here a few days early just so that we could, get a couple of practice days in, number one. and then refine some of the things that we've been working on at home. And so this is more of a refining process, a tuning up process before we get into competition. And that's kind of the micro view of what we're doing for this competition. The way practice fits in here, kind of in a macro view, is we're giving lots of different people experiences on different legs, so that they can have the opportunity as well as the skills to fit into a larger team. Later on, maybe Paris and also in subsequent years, so that we kind of build a team where various and large numbers of people, relatively large numbers of people, have skills where they can move around in different points of the track, different legs. Especially, I'm speaking mostly 4x1, and feel comfortable there.
And I am curious about that process that you're talking about, where here at the World Relays, obviously we don't have some of the other top guys, right? Whether it's a Christian Coleman or Fred Curley, who may or may not be in consideration for the relay once they make the team. So how do you use what you learn here at World Relays to then translate it to the final team, when we get to the Olympics?
Great question. What we're going to learn here is how different sets of people, work together. There are similarities between different types of sprinters, and so we think about that in terms of interchangeability. We'll figure out, for example, hey, we've got a guy who runs very well, on third that he really possibly fit in with in terms of exchanges on, leg 4 and leg 2. And if that match is not 100% match, what might be the differences that we'll have to adjust, in order to fit them in well, to figure out what we need. And even though these guys are very similar, in terms of times, that they run in the 100 meters, they get there in different ways. Some guys are very, very good at the major pull portion of acceleration in the beginning of the race. Some guys are good with accelerating in all phases of the race. Some guys are good, at the end. For the incoming runner, the exchange takes place, of course, at the end, and so we take all those factors into account. We'll make adjustments on our marks, and figure out like how they may fit, and so we can do comparisons between the strengths and weaknesses that athletes bring to the table to figure out how to fit other athletes. If that's the long answer to the question. So
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess building off that, one of the big things that everyone talks about is like athletes being selected for the relay, right? I'm curious what insight you have into how an athlete gets chosen for the men's 4x1. Is it just simply, top 3 at trials and then you make it to the team and then the rest of the 6? Or is it like you're making a decision on, I saw this athlete did something really well at a World Relays or at a Texas Relays, I want to make sure they're on the relay? Like, how do you make that decision?
And it's mostly both. But the trials are very important to us, because it's an objective measure of one of the most important components, which is just speed. And it's very objective. It's decided by a light beam. And so we don't really have to interfere with that. The data tells us what that is. And so most of our guys are very very competent at handling the stick. And so that's one way that we can use to make those choices. I think there may be plenty of opportunities to kind of move things around, but I think every athlete in our country understands how important the trials are in terms of it being an incredibly important factor, like where you place there. We have very few athletes who cannot handle the stick, or and that's my job, can't be taught, how to handle the stick. So those factors, both those factors, play into it. But I think you can safely say that a lot of objectivity goes into the decision, And so what we're trying to do is figure out ways to, counter. I guess the perception that there's a lot of subjectivity going on, in the U.S. election system.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm curious, do you have conversations with like whether it's coaches or agents, right, for these individual athletes, where people are like, I want my athlete on the team? Like, do you have insight into that process where you're like, actually, I'm seeing this other athlete is going to run? Like, is that kind of part of the process?
I mean, it can be. But a lot of times we have, much of the data, that we need. I mean, we may go to a coach, you know, for history, and it kind of relates to what we just talked about you know, objectivity. I think a lot of our coaches, you know, understand the importance of the objective process, you know, here, and so I think that understanding, you know, it eliminates a lot of those questions, you know, because, you know, when you eliminate, you know, the subjectivity, then, you know, naturally as an extension of that, you know, then what you don't know decreases, you know, substantially, right? Because you know things, you know, that are published, you know, by a light beam, you know, and we see. But there are, I mean, there are exceptions. We do need, you know, flexibility, you know, in a relay program, and sometimes we have to exercise that, and you know, we just have to see how things play out, you know, because at this point, you know, when we have a discussion like this, you know, it's largely a hypothetical conversation, you know, and you know, we kind of have to see, like, you know, what's going to happen. This can be very objective, you know, kind of easy process. Sometimes you can have injuries. Sometimes you may even have conflicts with the Olympic schedule, and it may cause the relay to have, you know, substitutions, which are factors, you know, in the decision making, you know, as well. So there are things that, you know, kind of go along with our decision making as it relates to the light beam. But what we try to do is keep it as objective as possible. Yeah.
Obviously, we know the USA men have had some struggles, ups and downs over the past, you know, it seems like a couple decades now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What is it going to take to make sure that the men for the USA are always winning gold in the 4x1?
You know, I think what we want to do is, you know, reach our potential, and you know, a lot of times that does mean, you know, winning gold. I think we just need, you know, some consistency that I think, you know, Mechelle and I can provide. You know, Michelle's my assistant coach for the, you know, for the men's 4x1, and we can inject that into the system, and I think we can do some things to increase our familiarity, you know, with each other, given how the U.S. system is built, and that means that, you know, Mechelle and I oftentimes have to get on the road, you know, and go out, you know, and work with a lot of the athletes, you know, in their geographic locations, you know, to build the familiarity, you know, with each other, so that when we do come together for a championship meet, that we don't have the degree of unfamiliarity that we've had, you know, in the past, you know, and that just requires us anticipating that, you know, up front, because, you know, as you know, our system it's a difficult system to build, you know, a relay, but that's what makes it fun, though, at the same time. You know, our team isn't formed until right before, you know, we get to a major championship, but you can still figure out, like, well, who will be the people competing, you know, for that, and let's work with them, you know, beforehand, and kind of figure out a system to, you know, make sure that our performance is at a high level and consistent. Yeah.
So, world record. What do we think? Of course, Jamaica, they have the world record.
Mm-hmm.
The men has always been in the conversation of, you know, people always saying the USA men should have the world record. They are capable of it. I mean, what do you think based on what you see?
Several U.S. teams and several combinations of our U.S. athletes have, you know, definitely have the talent to break the world record. You know, and it's kind of related to what we're talking about before, is that we just have to get together, work together, become familiar with each other, so that the way that we work together with, you know, in the zones, can produce, you know, that world record, because the relay can be looked at simplistically. It's two elements of performance: speed performance and zone performance. You know, the second one is where we have difficulty. You know, we get that down with a number of different combinations, and yes, we can break the world record, and that's the puzzle, and that's the challenge, you know, that we have at hand. And you know, it can definitely be done, and you know, we just need to execute on the ideas that I've been working on so far. So, yeah. All right.
Thanks so much.